Morning light spilled across the small Memphis kitchen as Margaret Hayes sifted sugar into a steel bowl. At 63, her hands were slower than they used to be, but steady, practiced, sure. She folded strawberries through the cream, tasted for sweetness, and smiled. Claire always loved strawberry shortcake. It was the taste of summers when money was thin and love had to stretch. Margaret set the sponge layers on the rack and listened to the gentle tick of the wall clock. She imagined her daughter's laugh, the kiss on the cheek, the evergreen words, "Mom, you remembered." She laid a plain white tablecloth on the dining table and arranged a ring of grocery store roses in a glass jar. Red, because Claire once wrote in a school essay that red meant brave. Margaret pulled out the good plates, the ones she kept wrapped in tissue since Harold died, and added cloth napkins that had seen more ironing than use. She checked the oven again, even though the cake had cooled, because it calmed her to check. She smoothed her blouse, brushed a strand of gray behind her ear, and breathed in sugar and vanilla, and the faint echo of bygone birthdays. Just after noon, the front door opened. Claire stepped in with her husband, Derek, and their children. A swirl of coats and car keys and hurried voices. "Surprise, Mom," Claire said without smiling. Margaret felt her hope wobble, then stand straight again out of habit. "I made your favorite," she said. "I thought we could have lunch." The children drifted to the living room, screens lighting their faces. Derek hovered near the doorway, like a man who did not want to lean on anything. "What is all this?" Claire asked, her eyes on the roses, the cake, the plates that meant celebration. "It is your birthday," Margaret said. "I wanted to make it nice." Claire looked at her, expression flat as a closed door. "The best gift you could give me is to leave my life." The words arrived with no tremor, no apology, no place to hide. Margaret felt the room tilt. She gripped the back of a chair to keep from reaching for her daughter's hand. "I do not understand," she said, hearing the smallness in her own voice. "You never do," Claire answered. "You hover, you meddle. I am tired of it." They left as quickly as they had come. The door closed, and the house inhaled a heavy silence. That night Margaret sat at the table under the patient clock, the shortcake untouched. She lifted a fork, lowered it, and folded her hands instead. "This cannot be the rest of my life," she thought. In the stillness she made a promise she had never made before. Something would change, and the first thing would be her. She would choose herself, even if it hurt. Margaret lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling fan as it pushed warm Memphis air in slow circles. She thought of every sacrifice that had brought her here, to this moment of rejection. The memories marched in, one after another, like ghosts she had tried to keep buried. She remembered the time Claire was 8 and begged for ballet lessons. Margaret had taken on 2 extra shifts at the library, shelving books until her back ached, just to afford the tuition. When Claire wanted to study abroad in college, Margaret sold her beloved piano, the last gift Harold had ever bought her, so her daughter could board that plane with pride. Every dream Margaret once held for herself, she quietly folded away, packing them into invisible boxes labeled later. Later never came. Now, decades later, Margaret could hardly recognize her own house. The floral curtains she had sewn one summer while Harold still laughed beside her were stuffed into a closet. Claire had insisted on replacing them with sterile white blinds. The honey-colored walls, once warm, had been painted a cold slate gray. Even her favorite rocking chair had been exiled to the garage to make room for Claire's modern sofa. When Derek's car broke down, Margaret gave them money for a replacement. When the children needed new school clothes, she dipped into her retirement savings. She told herself it was love. She told herself it was temporary. But as she looked around, she realized the house no longer carried her fingerprints. She was a guest in her own home. The final insult came 3 days after the birthday confrontation. Margaret stood in the hallway with a basket of laundry when she overheard Claire on the phone. Her daughter's voice, sharp and casual, sliced through the air. "Honestly, she should just sign the house over to us. She's too old to manage it anyway. Derek and I deserve the space. She'll be fine in a small apartment. Margaret froze, her arms clutching the laundry to her chest as if the cotton shirts could shield her from the words. Too old. Sign the house over. As if her decades of sacrifice were just paperwork to be transferred. Her throat tightened, but no sound came. Later that evening, Margaret pulled out the leather journal she had not opened in years. The pages smelled faintly of dust and ink. With trembling hands, she wrote the words that had been circling in her chest. I have been erased in my own home, no more. She pressed the pen harder against the page, the letters digging into the paper, as if carving her resolve. For the first time in decades, Margaret allowed herself to picture a life not built around Claire's happiness. A fragile flicker of defiance stirred inside her, and she did not push it away. 2 mornings later, Margaret sat at the kitchen table, with a stack of unopened envelopes, bills, statements, notices. For months she had been too weary to look closely. But after hearing Claire's words about the house, something inside her refused to stay blind. She slipped on her reading glasses, poured herself a cup of black coffee, and began to read. At first, the numbers blurred. Then slowly, the truth sharpened. Withdrawals she didn't remember authorizing. Thousands of dollars siphoned off in neat, regular amounts. Margaret's chest tightened. She flipped through more papers and felt her stomach sink further. Transfers marked education and car repairs that she never approved. Her fingers trembled. She set the papers down and stared at the quiet house around her. The ticking clock suddenly felt like a countdown, each second louder than the last. Claire, she whispered, but the name tasted bitter now. That afternoon she gathered the statements into a folder and walked to a law office on Union Avenue. The building was brick, old but dignified, with brass letters above the door. Janet Porter, attorney at law. Margaret hesitated on the steps. Her entire life she had been the caretaker, the one who gave, not the one who asked for help. But she forced her feet forward. Inside, Janet, a woman in her 50s with steady eyes and a calm presence, listened carefully as Margaret explained. I think my daughter has been taking money. I don't want to believe it, but the numbers don't lie. Janet folded her hands. You're not overreacting, Margaret. Financial exploitation happens more than you'd think, especially within families. You have rights. You can freeze your accounts, revise your will, and reclaim authority over your property. Margaret's throat felt dry. Freeze my accounts? It means your daughter won't be able to touch your money again, Janet explained. And if you wish, we can put legal protections around your house. If she's been pressuring you to sign it over, we can stop that. Margaret stared at her lap. Guilt and relief warred inside her. To fight back against her own child felt like betrayal. But wasn't it betrayal that brought her here? Janet continued gently. There's something else. I noticed a line in your statements. Derek tried to use your name to co-sign a loan. That could have put your home at risk. Margaret's head shot up. What? It didn't go through because the bank required your signature in person. But it shows intent. For a long moment, Margaret couldn't breathe. Her daughter had taken her money, and now her son-in-law had tried to take her name. The people she had sacrificed everything for were dismantling her piece by piece. When she finally walked out of the office, the Memphis sun hit her face. The air felt different, charged, as if the city itself were whispering, "Wake up, Margaret. Protect yourself." She clutched the folder of legal papers against her chest. For the first time in years, she felt a strange, trembling sense of power. The next evening, the Hayes house was alive with the noise of footsteps and slammed doors. Claire came home late, shopping bags dangling from her arms, the children bickering in the living room. Margaret waited in the kitchen, her folder of bank statements and notes laid neatly on the table. The kettle whistled faintly, steam clouding the window above the sink. "Claire," Margaret said as her daughter breezed in, setting bags down with a thud. "Not now, Mom. I'm busy," Claire muttered, reaching for her phone. "This can't wait." Margaret's voice was firmer than she expected. She slid the papers across the table. "I saw the bank statements. Thousands gone. Withdrawals I never made. And Derek, he tried to put my name on a loan without my consent." Claire froze, then rolled her eyes. We needed the money, school fees, the car breaking down. You wouldn't understand. You didn't even ask me, Margaret whispered. You're overreacting, Claire snapped. You have more than enough. Why are you being so selfish? The word hit Margaret like a slap. Selfish. After decades of holding her life together with grit and sacrifice, her chest burned as she steadied herself against the counter. I sold my piano so you could study abroad, Margaret said, her voice shaking. I worked double shifts to buy you ballet shoes. I gave you the best years of my life, Claire. And now it's our turn. Claire shot back, eyes narrowing. You're old, Mom. You don't need all this space, all this money. It's time you start thinking about us. For a moment, Margaret thought her knees might give way. She gripped the counter hard enough for her knuckles to whiten. I already spent my life thinking about you, she whispered. The children burst into laughter from the other room, oblivious. Derek shuffled in awkwardly, his eyes darting between mother and daughter, but he said nothing. His silence was louder than words. Listen carefully, Claire said coldly, leaning closer. If you keep pushing this, if you call lawyers and try to freeze things, you'll never see your grandchildren again, ever. Margaret's hands trembled as she poured water into her teacup, the steam rising between them like a fragile veil. She forced herself to meet her daughter's glare. I hope it doesn't come to that, she said softly, but I'm prepared if it does. For a second, the kitchen fell silent, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Claire's expression hardened into something Margaret had never seen before, not just anger, but contempt. You've changed, Claire spat. No, Margaret answered, her voice steadier now. I finally found myself. The next morning, Margaret's phone began to ring before she had even finished her tea. First, it was her cousin Janet, her voice sharp with judgment. Margaret, what on earth are you doing? Claire says you're throwing her family out on the street. How could you? Before Margaret could respond, another call buzzed through. Then another. Old friends from church, neighbors she barely knew. Each voice carried the same weight of scorn. How could you do this to your daughter? She's your only child. Think of the grandchildren. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, her mug growing cold in her hands, listening to accusation after accusation. Claire had painted herself as the victim, weeping into the phone, spinning stories about her cruel, heartless mother, and people believed her. That evening, the house echoed with hostility. Claire stomped from room to room, slamming doors so hard the walls rattled. The children avoided Margaret's eyes, whispering with their mother. Even the family dog, once so eager to curl at Margaret's feet, now skittered nervously between rooms, sensing the tension. Margaret wrote in her journal that night, her hand pressing deep grooves into the paper. I will not be erased. I will not be silenced, even if they turn the world against me. 2 nights later, Derek knocked on her door softly. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. Margaret, can I talk to you? She opened the door cautiously. Derek's eyes darted down the hall, making sure Claire wasn't near. He stepped inside and lowered his voice. You don't know the whole truth, he said. Claire's been hiding things. The money, it wasn't just for school or the car. She has debts, Margaret. Serious ones. Margaret's breath caught. Debts? What kind of debts? Derek rubbed his forehead, shame flickering across his face. Gambling, online games, casinos when she travels for work. I tried to cover for her, but it's worse than I thought. That's why she's been desperate. That's why she wants your house. Margaret's stomach twisted. She sank into her rocking chair, gripping the armrests. Her daughter, the girl she had sacrificed everything for, was dismantling her life, not just out of entitlement, but out of addiction and lies. Why are you telling me this now? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because it's going to come out anyway, Derek muttered. And I don't want you thinking I was part of it. He left her room before she could respond, leaving behind a silence that pressed like a weight on her chest. Margaret stared at her journal, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes. She had thought betrayal meant cold words, ungratefulness, financial theft. But this was deeper, a darkness she hadn't seen coming. That night she wrote a single line, "My own daughter is a stranger to me." The following week, Margaret sat across from her lawyer again, the morning sun spilling through the tall office windows. Her folder of evidence was thicker now: bank statements, copies of suspicious withdrawals, even notes of what Derek had confessed in hushed tones. Janet scanned each page with a frown, then looked up. "You were right to come here, Margaret," she said. "We'll file to freeze your accounts fully, and we'll reclaim sole control of your house. But I have to warn you, it won't be easy. Your daughter will fight this." Margaret's voice didn't waver. "Let her fight. I've been surrendering my whole life, not anymore." That night, when Claire discovered the legal filings taped to the front door, her fury exploded. She stormed into the kitchen, her face flushed. "What did you do?" she screamed. Margaret stood at the counter, pouring herself tea with steady hands. "I took back what's mine." "You're insane," Claire spat. "This is my home too. You can't just—" "This house was built by your father and me," Margaret cut in. "It was never yours to take." The words landed like a blow. Derek appeared in the doorway, his jaw tight. "You're tearing the family apart," he accused. Margaret turned to face him, her voice quiet but unyielding. "No, that already happened when you both decided my life was yours to consume." For a moment, the room went still, the only sound the faint whistle of the kettle. Claire's eyes burned. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Margaret's heart pounded, but her voice held firm. "Maybe, but at least I'll have my dignity." In the days that followed, the battle intensified. Claire tried to block the praise, filing objections, spreading her sob story wider to anyone who would listen. But Margaret's lawyer uncovered something shocking: a document at the county clerk's office, a small mortgage extension Claire had filed months earlier. The signature on it looked like Margaret's, but Margaret had never signed. Janet laid the paper out in front of her. "This is forgery," she said flatly. "It strengthens your case. If we push this, it won't just be eviction. It could be criminal." Margaret's hands trembled as she studied the false signature, her own name mangled into betrayal. For years she had feared losing her daughter's love. Now she feared she had already lost her daughter completely. That night, sitting alone in her guest room, she whispered into the dark, "Better to face war than live erased." Her words felt heavy, but also like armor. The house was no longer her sanctuary, but Margaret knew the fight had shifted. This wasn't just about protecting her savings or her walls. It was about protecting her existence. The day the sheriff's notice was delivered, the house fell silent in a way Margaret had not heard in years. Claire stormed out of the kitchen, the paper clutched in her fist, her voice cracking with rage. "You think this is over, Mom? You'll die alone in this place," she shouted. The children hovered by the stairs, confused and frightened, while Derek gathered boxes with a stony face. For hours, the sound of packing filled the walls. Drawers slammed, doors banged. Voices muttered sharp and bitter. Margaret stood in the hallway, her palms pressed against her thighs to keep from shaking. She did not celebrate, did not gloat. She simply waited, knowing this moment was both an ending and a beginning. By sunset, the last box had been carried to Derek's truck. Claire's perfume lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Derek paused on the porch, his expression conflicted. "I'm sorry for how it turned out," he said quietly. Margaret only nodded, her throat too tight for words, and then they were gone. The headlights disappeared down the street, leaving Margaret alone on the porch steps, with the cicadas humming in the twilight. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was hers. For the first time in decades, she could walk from room to room without feeling like an intruder. The master bedroom still smelled faintly of Claire's perfume, but when Margaret flung open the windows, fresh Memphis air rushed in, sweeping away years of tension. The transformation began slowly. She reclaimed her favorite rocking chair from the garage and placed it by the window. She pulled her rose-patterned curtains out of storage and hung them again, their faded fabric softening the morning light. She filled vases with fresh flowers, roses, daisies, even lavender from the farmer's market. Margaret also returned to something she had abandoned long ago: art. She found her old sketchbook in a box beneath the attic stairs, pages yellowed but waiting. She sat at her kitchen table, pencil trembling in her hand, and began to draw again, delicate roses, portraits half-formed, memories reborn in graphite. One afternoon she walked to the Memphis Community Center and signed up for an art class. The instructor, a warm woman named Claire, welcomed her. At first Margaret was shy, keeping to herself, but as the weeks passed, her laughter returned, quiet and surprising even to her own ears. "I feel silly drawing at my age," she admitted one evening. "Nonsense," an older man across the table replied. "You're not silly, you're free." Back home, Margaret played old jazz records Harold once loved. She cooked dinners for one and sat with a glass of sweet tea on the porch, watching the sun dip below the magnolia trees. The loneliness was still there, but it no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like space. Then came the letter. Mrs. Whitfield, her neighbor of 20 years, wrote, "I've seen your courage, Margaret. You remind us it's never too late to take back our lives." Margaret pressed the note to her chest, tears burning her eyes. For the first time in years, she believed it. She was visible again. Spring rain swept across Memphis. The night the phone rang, Margaret's heart jolted when she saw Claire's name on the screen. It had been months of silence. Her hand trembled as she pressed answer. "Mom," Claire's voice cracked, raw and tired. "We're broke. The kids miss you. I miss you." I shouldn't have said those things before. Margaret closed her eyes, listening to the daughter she had once carried through storms and sickness. Every instinct told her to open her arms, but another voice, calm, steady, born from months of healings, rose within. "I miss them too," Margaret said softly. "Then let us come back," Claire pleaded, "just until we get on our feet again." The ache in Margaret's chest was sharp, but she heard the warning in her own heart. If she opened the door again, the cycle would begin anew. She took a long breath. "I'm sorry, Claire. I can't let things go back to the way they were. You need to build your own life now." There was silence, then a click. The line went dead. Margaret sat in her rocking chair, tears streaming down her cheeks. Not just sorrow, but release. Days later, Derek appeared at her door alone, rain dripping from his coat. His face was lined with exhaustion. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I'm leaving Claire. I can't watch her destroy herself, or you, any longer. I should have stood up to her years ago. I'm sorry." Margaret studied his weary eyes. For a long moment, anger surged, but then it ebbed into something else. "Thank you for telling me," she said, "but you need to find your own path now, just as I had to find mine." He nodded, shame and gratitude mingling, then walked back into the rain. In the weeks that followed, Margaret's world grew brighter. She tended her rose garden, the soil rich and damp beneath her fingertips. Lavender sprouted along the fence line. Daisies opened their faces to the sun. The house, once a cage, was alive again. At the spring art showcase, in the community center, Margaret hung her drawings on the wall. Roses, hands, faces filled with unspoken emotion. Strangers stopped, admiring her work. A young woman asked, "Did you make these?" "Yes," Margaret replied softly, and for the first time she felt proud to claim something as hers. Later, she received another letter from Mrs. Whitfield. "I walked past your garden today. It's beautiful, just like you. You give hope to women like me, who thought it was too late. Thank you for reminding us that our stories aren't over." That evening, Margaret sat by her window as the sunset painted the sky gold. She opened her journal and wrote, "For so long I believed my worth was in what I gave away. Now I know my worth is simply in being. I am not disappearing. I am finally here." The doorbell rang. Two neighborhood girls stood holding a basket of muffins. "These are for you, Mrs. Hayes," one chirped. "Mom says your garden inspires her." Margaret knelt, smiling through tears. "Tell her I said thank you." As the girls' laughter trailed down the street, Margaret stepped onto the porch. The breeze carried the scent of roses, the sound of new beginnings. Lesson: love without boundaries erases the self. True family begins when you honor your own worth. teaching others that respect is the root of love.